Hi everybody. So I'm Sarah Sturgess, Agency Director at SMRS. We're currently over on a few tables sponsoring today's event. SMRS is an employer marketing agency. So what we do for our clients is we support them across employer branding and also across all areas of talent attraction as well. So as has already been said, I sort of am a little bit on the spot today because sadly Jen was poorly and I found out about 7 o'clock last night. So I expect lots of sympathy from you all today. Where this is good and bad for me, the good thing is if any of you are familiar with Myers-Briggs, I profile as an ESTJ. So the extrovert bit is fantastic, more than happy to stand up here. Quite good with detail, and the presentation that we've got to deliver today is a detailed piece of research. But happy to think on my feet as well. But the last bit, the J bit, is all about being prepared. So 2 hours after I'd managed to get the kids to bed last night, I managed to go through this presentation in a bit more detail. So fortunately, I had watched Jen present it, so hopefully I can answer your questions. But the other good thing is I am looking around the room and there are a few people in the room who I recognise because we've done 2 events over the last month, which is similar to this research. So when I get to questions at the end, if I can't answer them, I'll be picking out people in the audience. So I hope that's okay for everybody. Okay, so this piece of research is a generational piece of research that we did in conjunction with Reed. So the way in which we partnered with Reed on this was to actually use their data. So when we do surveys, it can be quite difficult to get hold of that job-seeking audience because pretty much anybody might be a job seeker. So what we did with Reed was we tied into their database. Through this research, you will notice some aspects of it are sort of quite veered towards the people who are job hunting. So if you just bear that in mind as we go through some of the stats, then at the end you won't kind of be saying, yeah, but that's job seekers, so they would have said that. So the other apology I have is because I haven't had as long as I would like to prepare, I will need to be checking in on the slides quite a bit. So I'm not going to be wandering around end to end on the stage, as some of the very good presenters that we've had today have been doing. So the purpose of this piece of research was to investigate the drivers' attitudes and behaviours of 4 different generations. I think you'll all be familiar with the generations that we've used, but just so that you can sense check, because once we go through the presentation, we'll be saying baby boomers, Generation X, Y, and Z. So this slide just gives you a little bit of context as to who we're actually talking about. The reason we did this piece of research was because we really wanted to understand how do job seekers differ in each of those categories. The total number of people that participated in the survey was nearly 2,500, so it's quite a robust sample size. And I think if the guys at Reed are happy, this might well be something that we do year on year, and we could look at how this changes as well going forward. So we did 2 stages of research. The quantitative research was an online survey, 18 questions, didn't take people too long to complete, so nice and straightforward. What we then did is 4 qualitative focus groups, so that what we could do is to get some more in-depth information from each group that we were talking to. Where the qualitative research came in very useful is if you look back to the previous slide where we're talking about Generation Z, a lot of that audience won't be actively job seeking. So the reason that we added the focus group in was to get some more information. As we go through the slides as well, you will notice that some of the responses don't have an answer for Generation Z. It's purely because they're not in the workplace and they're not able to answer some of those questions. Okay? So, in terms of the first questions that we asked, along the lines of the 3 most important things you look for in a job. Now, there weren't sort of any standout factors, but the top 3 were location, money, and training and development. Now, I think what I want to try and do as we go through this research is kind of err towards things that might be of interest and relevance to you in your day-to-day roles. So from a location perspective, I think what this shows is that what you promote about where you are, your location, and what is attractive about that is really important to candidates. So this might be things around if you are here in Manchester and you've got a great location to talk about and to sell, think about where you might add content around that on your social media, on your careers site. But also, the other thing we come across quite a lot with retail clients in particular are those hotspot areas where you cannot find candidates. So think about how you could put extra content on your website as well around some of those locations to try and promote that particular area. One of the other things is that although salary is not important across all groups, and you can't exactly shift pay scales quite often, so have a think about how you package the offer, but also look around, think about things like the gender diversity as well, the gender pay gap, and think about how you're packaging your offer to candidates as well. For example, are you asking people what they currently earn and therefore tailoring the salary that you offer to what their current salary is? One of the things to think about is actually packaging what that job's worth and paying according to that. On the last point as well, the training and development, I think it's about thinking of the audiences that you're talking to. How do they want to be trained and how do they want to develop? So think about things like online portals and the opportunities to give to people where they can consume their training and development in different ways as well. So these were the standout areas. The next question we asked, which is, how long are you going to looking to stay in a job? I think what starts to get really interesting is when you get to the Generation Z, very unlikely to be staying for long periods of time in the roles. What you do have from a Z and Y perspective, when I put the next one up, is that they are sort of 44% and 21% most likely to stay in a company for 1 to 2 years. What this starts to link into is, as we saw from the first speaker today, from a graduate recruitment perspective, think about the length of that program that you're offering. Because in effect, what you might find is that some of the audiences that you want to talk to are actually looking for a shorter term with you. And some businesses out there right now are doing a lot more internships. So Google, for example, you'll have seen, some of you may have seen the film actually around interns for Google. So a lot more freedom and movement around that. I think also when you think about the career progression and planning, 78% of Generation Z and 59% of Generation Y expect to have left your company in 5 years' time. What does that mean from a from a loss of information from those kind of people as well? Okay. So, have you looked for a job in the last 3 years? Now, this is one of the slides I think is slightly biased because obviously the data comes from people who are job seeking. So, let's take this one with a pinch of salt. But Generation Y, slightly higher than others, shows a large percentage of candidates looking for jobs regardless of generation. So, I think it does suggest that the employment market is very active. There's a big shift now, I think, towards people being less likely to look for a job for life, and it'd be much more around switching employers. So the thing to think about as well, going back to the previous slide, is if people are moving around from one business to another quite frequently, especially in the Y and Z generations, what you need to probably start to think about is what opportunities are you giving them to move around in your business from an internal mobility perspective, but then also think about things like how you would get people coming back into your organisation as well, because their careers are a long period of time. They might do a couple of years for you and be interested in coming back further on in their career as well. Information you want to know about potential employers. So this was an open-ended question, so the information included here is quite important because there are a lot of similarities. Employer brand, value, and culture was a really high area of this. And so what this is showing to us is people really want to know who you are as a business, what your story is. And I think from an employer brand perspective, as we've heard earlier, thinking about that now is going to become increasingly important, because as you look at the ratios on here, the percentages, the Generation Z are even more likely to want to know what your business is all about. So as they start to come through the workplace, I would say that employer branding is going to become more important. But I would probably say that anyway, because I work in that area. But I think what's also important is engaging them with relevant content, information about, the secondary there, company information, the size, the history, the financials, and the growth. Quite often, you will leave a lot of that information to the corporate side and not bring a lot of that content into what you're saying on your recruitment pages or in your social context. So do think about how important that is for people throughout the journey. Role details, so what I come across quite a lot is organisations who the majority of their external advertising is putting roles out there. So lots and lots of jobs that are out on the job sites and in the marketplace. I think what this tells us is it's not about what those roles are. They want to buy into the company. They want to buy into your organisation. Then they'll have a look at what roles you have available to you and have you got something for them. I think one of the big areas as well, looking forward, is talent pooling and how you pool candidates so that you've got them for the future. How you engage around your employer brand, your values, your culture, that is about how you will engage with candidates, not just for today, but for 2, 3, 10 years' time. So it is important to think in that respect as well. The preferred interview methods, I think the next session is on video interviewing, so apologies, because this says that video interviewing isn't very popular. It's a growing area, is what I would say there. There is a high predominance of people who would prefer the face-to-face. Now, I think, from what I see in the market, I think automation's continually gonna grow. I think where video I see is helping people as well is improving the processes, making it faster, helping with consistency, can also help with cost savings as well. So I don't think video will stay at these kind of levels in the future. I think what we'll be looking at is that growth in popularity. But maybe a different thing to consider is how do you communicate with candidates around the potential of using video? So for example, it might not be the mechanism that you're using with candidates. It might be that you're just not preparing them or giving them choices. And increasingly things like online applications as well and video working hand in hand to give people more choice and options around that. So how long after an interview do you expect to hear back? This is a really scary start. So in effect, people expect to hear back within a week. I don't know how you guys think are you performing against that kind of measure? And this is consistent across all generations. So it's not that there's a shift in expectation here. It is that all these generations are pretty consistently saying the same thing. I think if you can communicate with candidates up front to say these are the kind of timescales we'll be working to, that helps alleviate some of this as a problem. But also, if you can deliver to these timescales, then that's going to do wonders for your candidate experience because you're meeting their expectations right from the beginning. So consider what your processes are. The other thing I would encourage as well is get feedback from your candidates, because in different roles and in different types of organisations, that expectation may well change. So look at what this means for you as an organisation. So the data shows a huge positive response in favour of referring friends, colleagues, either from their professional networks or where it's seeing increasing growth in people using social networks for referral as well. So one of the things that I think we need to consider here is that if you haven't got an effective referral scheme, start thinking about it now, because it is fundamentally going to be one of your key channels to hiring people. If you have got one, think about how you're promoting it, how you're using it. Is there more that you could do in this particular area? Because as in terms of all of these areas, it does come out very, very high. I think what we'd also encourage with employee referral is think about encouraging your people to target people for specific roles. there's often a big catch-all employee referral system that runs for organisations. So try and target them into particular roles, because no one's going to know more. If it's an IT role, a tech role, no one's going to know more about that particular role and what it involves than people doing that actual job. What are the top 3 qualities you look for in a manager? I read this and thought, right, okay, I need to work hard here as a manager, because good communicator is very, very high for Generation Y. We don't have any stats, unfortunately, on this particular question for Zs, but we've got some further on as well. So it's becoming more and more important that you're a good communicator. I think where you need to consider this is increasingly as well, and we'll see further on in some of this research, increasingly people want more flexibility around their working as well. So more likelihood to request to work from home and have that flexibility. But the communication is really important at the same time. So it is, it's certainly considered as for future talent graduates coming through as being a key factor. Think about what technology you offer to people as well around communication, because there might be opportunities for you to have more discussion forums. Things like Yammer is used commonly in businesses, but then also things like SharePoint to share information. Feeding into the last point around employee referral as well, that connection between communicating with your people around schemes that you're offering and how they might refer could link into this as well. So, being able to work flexible hours. More than 78% consider working flexible hours as medium or high importance across all generations. I think a lot of companies now are starting to have different policies on flexible working, but how are these being communicated? Are these clear to people? But also, how realistic is it for people to do the jobs that you need them to do on a flexible working arrangement? So if you do it and you have a fantastic sort of story behind that, do communicate it, because it's going to be well received by people. If you don't, though, do be careful around what you are saying. And I think one of the things I find interesting in this area is if you do say to people, you can do flexible hours, that can make people be very flexible in terms of when they're working. I'm very guilty of late night emails. People who work with me will already know that. Does that then mean that the expectation is that people will reply to that? In our business, no, but I think I had one at 4 a.m. this morning from a colleague. So, these things happen quite often when you're given that flexible working arrangement. So the flexibility to work from home is relatively high importance. If you look at the high and medium categories, that's over 66%. The most positive response for this is Generation X, which I think if you think about that profile as well, these may well be quite likely to be people with families, so that flexibility becomes even more important as you've got children to get to school, get to wherever. So again, think about your company policy, how do you promote that, and what are the opportunities? I think what is good around this flexibility to work from home piece as well is how do you align that with people also getting to communicate with their managers in the office, as so it is so important further on in the research as well. So I think what people are looking for is that connection between being able to work from home, but also getting that communication and that time in their office locations. A company that cares about my health and happiness. This has come out very important. Again, I really expected when we did this research to see big differences. As you're going through, you'll see they're not massively different between the different generations. But health and happiness is really important to people. Now, in terms of you as a business, how do you communicate this? Is that something that you include as part of your EVP? Or is it something that maybe isn't true? So what you've got to do is just to make sure you get a balance there in what's real for your organisation. We saw more information about diversity earlier. More than 80% of people are rating having a diverse workforce. So we can start to see how this is becoming increasingly important. And I think, what we need to consider, though, and especially when you're attracting people in, which a lot of this research centres around, is just avoiding that tokenism and making sure that it's a really authentic and honest portrayal around diversity. If you're not good at recruiting in a certain area, don't just put lots of people on the advert who maybe don't even work for you to try and bring those kind of audiences in. I think some of the things that were talked about earlier around this particular area, more sort of under the radar ways of helping with this balance. So, a company that provides breakout spaces, I started to see this probably about 2 or 3 years ago, mostly in things like tech startups, where it was all about having a slide in the office and being able to have breakout, chill-out areas. But we are seeing this more and more certainly from a city centre location, and people are putting this as a bigger priority. So having breakout spaces is all about informal communication as well. It's about allowing people to just go for a coffee and a chat and discuss something rather than everything being informal meeting spaces. So think about where you work, think about whether you're offering that to people, but also when we are, increasingly working longer hours, that ability to just get away from your desk when maybe you haven't had a lunch break is something that will appeal to people. So these breakout areas, and some of the clients I work with, they're the most popular areas in the entire building, and for those reasons. Corporate social responsibility. 90% consider that a company that values corporate responsibility is of medium or high importance to them. So I think what we also see here is that quite often this kind of information around sort of your values, your ethics, environmental policy, how you manage your people in this way, we often see this purely on corporate sites. We don't always see this factored and brought into some of the recruitment pages that you have on your careers website. So have a think about what else you could do in this way. This is a massive area as well for promoting through social media. So the more and more information you can get out in this space is really important and is becoming increasingly important. I enjoy working in a team. Very high connection to this from, again, all audiences. Slightly less on Generation Z. Not sure around that, but something to keep an eye on is that shift in generation. Is that because the Gen Zs are likely to want to work more remotely, more flexibly, therefore that team environment isn't the top of their agenda. So that's certainly something to watch out for, especially with people coming into your business. So for example, at apprenticeship level, if this isn't as high on their expectations, you might be saying, oh yeah, come and work as part of our great team in your advertising, but actually, how bothered are they compared to other generations? So think about, how you can engage with employees as well who work remotely to make sure they do feel like part of the team, especially in the Gen X, who have, on the one hand, said they want flexibility, and on the other hand, said they want to feel part of that team. I'm prepared to go the extra mile to get the job done. The results, again, similar mindset and attitude across everybody. I think it's important, though, to make sure you've got clear communications and set expectations with candidates at the right level so that they know what they can achieve in their role. I think going that extra mile is a little bit difficult to really understand what is meant by that. So I think it might, one of the things to think about is how does it link into reward? How does it link into the fact that people increasingly want to get better communication from their manager, therefore how do you keep feeding back to people? So that the circle kind of evolves in that respect. Money is the biggest motivator, according to this research. However, it's not the only motivator, and bearing in mind it is difficult for you quite often to change what salaries you can afford to pay to people. Think about what else you can package up and what you can offer to people. So we've already heard about how important location is, how important training and development is, the value and the culture, that connection to CSR work. So all of these things become that package and that offer that you can create to people about your business. So align these things into your EVP. Align these things into what is most important for people. Don't just rely on the money, because, you know, fine if you're one of the highest payers, but somebody's got to be the highest payer. But that's not always about the balance. So in summary, I think what this research certainly has shown us is the generations aren't that different in the workplace, certainly in the job-seeking workplace that we've looked at in this particular area. One of the things that we do have is a full detailed research report on this. So if anyone would like it, just pop over to Andreas and he will give us a wave and he'll take your name and details and we'll get that out to you. So the only last thing is to say thank you, but also if anyone's got any questions, I will do my very best to answer them or delegate them out to someone in the audience.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sarah.